Yeah, let's go to Jamie, because if we still have to talk about Brienne, we can do it there
Yeah,
also.
of course.
Okay, so that's me.
That's
Jaime Lannister, who I bagged along with Cersei, I think is absolutely fascinating in these two books because we see him really coming to an understanding of who he is and having the strength to sort of come to terms with what his relationship with Cersei is. So as it opens, you've got the funeral of Tywin, and I think what's quite fascinating here is that Cersei has a presumption that they are now going to rule as king and queen effectively, as hand and regent. And he very quickly and very smartly rejects that, which is really, very hurtful for Cersei, and really I think is part of a contributing factor towards her spiraling downfall when she
mm,
realizes he isn't going to do it. So it's quite a strong move by him. And then we have this really touching scene where he's speaking or comforting Tommen, who's retching at the smell of his decaying grandfather, and says, this is how you cope with stuff like this. You have to go away and sign, which is so touching. It's probably
mm,
one of the first scenes we've seen with Jamie as a father to his children.
mm,
And I think what's really amazing is as the book goes on, we don't see him with his children again, but every now and again in his POVs, he'll mention them and he'll mention potentially acknowledging paternity. And he says, with reference to Tommen later in the novel, in fact, I think it might even be in Dance, I wonder if he'll be happy to gain a father and lose a crown. And with Marcella, again, he talks about what will happen when he speaks to her. So I think there's something really wonderful about this newly rebuilding, redeemed Jamie, thinking that he wants to be a father to these children. Because I always used to feel it was really weird in the first book that it would just, he never really, he had this affair with Cersei, but you never saw him as thinking about having a relationship with his children. So that's really important to me. So anyway, he does all this. He realizes that Cersei has probably been sleeping with Tyrion. He tries to kind of justify it as Tyrion's being a liar and being hurtful, and oh my God, she would never go with someone as kind of completely emasculated as Lancel. But so he comes to terms with it. And eventually, we see him then leave King's Landing and go and basically wrap up the war on behalf of the Lannisters. And I think what's interesting in these parts of the books is that you see how wise he's become,
mhm,
how unwilling to shed blood without cause. So a lot of his motivation in how he goes around bringing it to an end, what's happening at River Run, and bringing an end to the siege at Raventree, is that he doesn't want to be seen as bearing arms against House Tully if he can get away with it, which I think
mhm,
is interesting. But he shows a lot of wisdom. So, when he goes to Riverrun, he realizes that he can't be obstinate with the Blackfish. He realizes that these mock executions of Edmure are just nonsense. And he realizes exactly the weak point of Edmure. And he goes to it, the concept of trebucheting the baby. He hates himself for doing it, which I think is really good. So he does it because he has to in a pragmatic way. But he acknowledges that it's a nasty low blow. And what I find amazing in the River Run episode is that he has complete compassion for Edmure. In other words, he thinks he's a bit of a sort of spineless little shit, but at the same time, he recognizes later on that people are going to always think that Edmure was a coward for giving in, when really he respects him for putting the life of his child first. So he kind of
mm,
sees Edmure as being traduced in the way that he was traduced as Kingslayer, and having compassion in that way, which I think is so laudable. And then finally, we see him at Raventree. And again, this is like a sort of limp sort of backed siege that's been going on. And he brings it to an end really within an hour of getting there. And what is so wonderful about this thing is that he does a total Tywin. In other words, he takes, or he doesn't do quite a Tywin. He takes the hostage from the guy who was holding out resistance, fine, but he doesn't take the beloved daughter. He takes Hoster, the bookish boy, thinking that the bookish boy won't have fun in King's Landing, which is quite a compassionate thing to do. But then he tricks the opposing side into admitting, oh, but I have this many children and that many children. Says, right, well, you send the daughter to court. And that is so freaking sly. I mean, that is the wonderful kind of Tyrion Tywin sort of real intellectual outmaneuver. And I just feel that by the end of these two books, FeastDance, Jaime has become, number one, a very compassionate, very honorable person. Um, he's able to be pragmatic when he needs to be to save lives. Like, I need to bring the siege to an end, so I'm going to threaten Edmure. But still, he's displaying a kind of wisdom and a kind of war council wisdom that you never would have suspected in Game of Thrones, where he was just this very arrogant, very handsome, but cocksure little nasty little, bitch, basically. So I think Jaime, by the end of these books, is probably the character I most admire. I think he's a very rounded, very sort of admirable person. And what amazes me again and again with Jaime is that he's able to be very empathetic to the people that he actually doesn't like very much. But anyway,
Mhm.
so ends my sort of my poem of praise to Jaime.
No, it was wonderful.
Yeah, very well done.
Yeah, I think I'm
Yeah.
slightly in love with Jaime after my reread. And it's not really harmed by the fact that in the show he's played by Nikolai Coster-Waldau, who's just obviously deeply hot. So it's like this wonderful confluence. But Jaime was a character I hated in Game of Thrones, as most people did. And it's just amazed me how I've come to really respect him. And I think if ever anyone says anything to me about George R. R. Martin, I always say, look at that character and how he's taken him through this massive arc. And that is just amazing writing, because at every step of that journey, it's totally psychologically credible. And I think that's really amazing.
But was Jamie actually truly bad ever? I mean, he kills Ares then in the bathtub scene we learn because Ares was gonna burn the city down, and then he threw Bran out of the window to kind of protect his sister. Uh, and Yeah, so I mean, are we liking Jamie more in these books because we get a POV finally on what exactly he's thinking, and this arrogant bastard is not actually his true form, but it's just a facade he puts up, and it's a carefully cultivated facade because he wouldn't have won River Run if Edmure did not take his bluff, right? I mean, basically, Edmure his reputation precedes him, and yeah, I should ask, do you think if Edmure refused to surrender River Run, do you think he would have carried out his bluff and trebucheted his son over?
I think if Edmure had refused, he would have just flipping, well, yeah, got on with it. But he wanted to avoid that. But he chose his mark. I mean, that half the battle is choosing the person you're going to fight, or choosing the ground upon which you're going to fight. And the
Hmm.
battle was already won. There was no doubt Edmure wasn't going to go for it, because Edmure is that kind of little twat, isn't he? So I think that was well played. In terms of, was
Right.
Jaime ever really bad? Well, he's, as you say, the murders to which he's attributed, he had some cause, some just cause, arguably. Bran, I
Right.
think, is a little bit more sketchy. Bran, he pushed a
Right.
little kid out a window. That's kind of slightly shitty. So I think you can say, oh, well, it was because he was in love with his sister, but still, it was protecting his secret as much as hers. Um,
Right.
and interestingly, when he does that, he never does it because he thinks, oh, I must protect the kind of safety of my kids. If they're found out to be bastards, their claims are at risk. It's really just a very unthinking kind of
Right.
lustful act.
I
But
mean, when he says the things I do for love, it kind of means it.
yeah, but I mean, in the first book, I think most chicks like me were probably in love with Jon Snow as the slighted bastard, right? And he's at some really he uses his like malicious humor as a mask to sort of cover up his own sensitivity.
Right.
But while he's doing that, he says some pretty nasty things. He can be very, I mean, he can be very cruel, unintentionally maybe, but it does happen. So he's never evil, but he's certainly cruel and hard. And then you
Mm.
do realize that it's partly a mask. But I think he's a different person. In those first two books, he's very narcissistic. When he says jokingly, "Oh, I'll just go to war and I'll start the war for Cersei's cunt." I mean, he's half joking, but there is a certain very dangerous, brutal, nihilistic streak. So long as he's with Cersei, nothing else matters. So throwing
Uh-huh.
the kid out of the window doesn't matter, because that kid doesn't matter. Nothing matters relative to their love. And as he gets more mature in the books, everything matters. He's very careful with everyone else's feelings in a way that he just really isn't in those first two books. He's very self-centered.
In regards to whether he is evil or not, let's see. What about when he orders Ned Stark's men to be murdered?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
There's a certain casualness to it, isn't there?
well, if Rob kind of does the same thing, he splits its army up into two units, right? The 2000 and the 18,000. 2000 go to war with Tywin, and then he takes the main army to fight with Jaime. So, in a way, he kind of sacrificed his men to capture Jaime, right? So, this in Middle Ages, soldiers are
But there's a
Dispensable.
slight difference
yeah,
because
dispensable.
what Rob did was a war tactic. So that to me is a bit more justifiable than what Jaime does. Rob is fighting a war, and that's how you do things. You outflank people, you do this, you do that. But with Jaime, I think in that first book, he's just, in a sense, he's a little bit of a stooge. I mean, by any means necessary, he does what he needs to do for Cersei. And
Right, and he
he has a very casual attitude to other people's lives, which is a little bit unforgivable in that first book.
well, he was doing whatever he was doing to for Tyrion, right? I mean, here's this guy who's taken his brother hostage. Obviously, he's going to be as hard with him as he can. And when the horse falls over him, he does the honorable thing and walks away and doesn't kill Ned Stark there. So that does say something about him.
Yeah, at the end of the day, whatever
Uh,
people say about him, he's a knight, right?
Yeah, he's basically, I feel like he can be as honorable as Ned Stark and Davos, but he lost his honor because of being the Kingslayer. So it's kind of this, he has this leeway on when he can choose to be honorable and when he cannot, because he's basically got nothing to lose. And him doing honorable actions like leaving Ned Stark alive, it actually does says more about him because he doesn't have to. He already lost his honor. Nobody's going to trust him now, but he still chooses to do it. While Ned Stark and Davos, they all have their honor intact, so it's much easier for them, you
And
know.
so
Uh,
exactly. So the way I feel about Jaime is not that you can ask, was he ever evil? Because I don't think he's ever immoral. He's kind of amoral. There's his
right.
Cersei, and everything else he values at kind of neutral. So he doesn't like kill Ned's men or whatever because he's a bad guy, or push Bran out of a window because he genuinely means Bran harm. It's just collateral damage to his love with Cersei. And
Mm,
therefore, I think you're right that when he does something honorable, it's because he's made a genuine personal choice to do it, not because he thinks the code of the knights says he should or some religion or whatever. It's because
right.
he's moved to do it, and therefore it has
Right.
more potency and validity. And therefore, when he comes up to against Brienne, who does have a code, it's such a charged world. It's such a massive change for him of
Mm,
perspective. But the fact that he can be redeemed by her shows that he is open to that kind of thing. He just never
right.
had that example before.
So I'm kind of interested to see how they do this now that Jamie is back in the books. I mean, sorry, in the TV show, back at King's Landing. It's going to be a lot different than the books, right? I mean, in the
Well,
books, he comes after Joffrey's dead, and in the books, Cersei was sleeping with the Kettle Blacks and a bunch of other people, and and I think Cersei kind of rejected him because of his crippling, and Jamie kind of rejected her because of all these allegations, and also Joffrey's dad also played into it. But now in the book or in the TV show, nothing like that has happened. I mean, she did sleep with Lancel, but not as prolific as in the books. And also Joffrey's alive, so Cersei is in a reasonably good state of mind.
and also
Uh,
Joffrey knows that Jaime is his father.
Suspects at
It's
least.
interesting how the interaction will take place between those two.
Right. No, I think he still believes Robert is his father because when he was talking with the Tywin, he said, "My father won the trident while you were hiding." And so I think he rather believed Robert is his father than
Yep,
Jamie.
he does. Well, I guess he tries to think that Robert is his father, but he has heard the rumors about Cersei and Jaime.
Right, right.
And also, to show Joffrey's older and wiser in a way. I mean, with the younger kids, they can get away with being a little bit naive and not knowing, but it's going to be hard to make this Joffrey look like he doesn't really know. And I think it will be a little bit incredible if when Jamie's back, Joff doesn't try and have a word with him. Quiet way. Listen, mate, happened there.
Yeah. It'll be very interesting to see how Jamie and Cersei fall out in the show, because everything's different. So,
And I
yeah.
think the showrunners have the capacity for that to go really horribly wrong. I think that particular relationship for next season could become the kind of the Jon Snow in season 2 that just gets. It feels like every season one character gets totally mishandled. So season 1 was probably middle finger. Season 2 probably still middle finger and Jon Snow. Last season, I don't know who would it. Catelyn, yeah, big time.
Catelyn, definitely.
And then next season, I think there's such a capacity for that to go horribly wrong.
I think the interactions between, the scenes between Brienne and Cersei will be great.
I mean, is Cersei going to be jealous of Jaime and Brienne's closeness now?
And I'm sure adding a lot of digs about her clothing and how ugly she is, and I can imagine, some great scenes between those three involved.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it'll either be really awesome writing and acting, or it's going to be very, very, very horrible. And I guess we hope for the former. But it's really interesting. So, what will he do? I mean,
Yep, I did read a theory about. Let's see. So they need to buy some time until Joffrey's death. So the Knight of Flowers orders for Brienne to be placed in a cell, or the tower cell.
You're right, Black Cells or something. Yeah.
But why rush to bring them back and then just chuck them in a cell? I mean, I think they obviously know what they're going to do with this, right? Already, otherwise they wouldn't have brought them back.
I hope so.
Yeah. That kind of puts it on ice for a bit until everything catches up.
No pun intended. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's going to be interesting because that Jaime, I feel Jaime's a lot further along his redemption in the show. So partly because the bathtub scene was done so well, and a lot of the conversations they've had, I feel Jaime's a lot further along that path to self-knowledge. Because in the book, even after Tywin's funeral, even when he's going to Riverrun, he still kind of will have the odd sentence where he's going back and forth. But he seems to be a little bit more over Cersei in the show.
Yeah, for me it was the point where he gave Brian the sword and said, "Call this Oathkeeper and go out now." So yeah, that was definitely the point where, oh God, this is totally different.